Coming to you from an undisclosed location somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere, fighting against the alien apocalypse. This is Truth Perception.
Mr. Grant Cameron, I appreciate you taking your time with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate your interest.
So your book, Managing Magic, the Government's UFO Disclosure Plan. What do you mean by managing magic?
The way I look at it is that if you understand what's happening behind the scenes, CIA people, since 1991, they've been talking about, the word they use is phenomenology. And what I basically think it means is that it's not just a UFO thing. And in fact, Jacques Vallée has said already back in the 1970s, he'd be very surprised if this turned out to be just extraterrestrials. And I'm in that camp now, that what I believe is going on, that it's extraterrestrial, but it also has all sorts of sort of spiritual components, all sorts of non-local components. And so what I say, the reason I use the word magic is that basically when they first recovered the Roswell crash, or a crash before that, there's a rumor they had one before that, they realized that what they were dealing with was almost like discovering magic. And it involves all the different paranormal phenomena, plus the sort of the physical aspects of crafts, that these, what I believe is these beings can actually come into the physical, go back out of the physical. And so therefore, I think it's in the intelligence community, it's much more a thing where they are realizing this is a very, very complex issue that they're dealing with. And that's maybe why the president doesn't stand up and say there's extraterrestrials here, because that may not be the real answer. It may be much more complex than that, and he can't really say that.
So who are the 14 magicians that you talk about in your book that are in charge of the secrecy?
Okay, most of them are ex-CIA people. What seems to happen is the people that they pull to do this material, and the magicians are the people who are handing the material out. They're the people who are told what's going on. They're given briefings, and it's their role to pass the material into the public. So they're generally ex-CIA people. The one right now may be active, and he may also not be in the CIA. We really don't know what his role is. His name is Dr. Ron Pandolfi. The New York Times in 1996 called him the top scientist in the CIA. We know he's been with the CIA since 1983, and that he's been involved in UFOs. At least until a couple of years ago, he was notorious as the man who ran the weird desk, or the desk, the phenomenology desk, with remote viewing, UFOs, psychic phenomena, all this kind of stuff. So one of the rumors was he had gone to Homeland Security, and that would make sense. But most of them are outside the government. Another example of one of the magicians is Dr. Kit Green, who ran the Weird Desk before Ron Pandolfi. He ran it from 1969 to 1983. He retired. He took a job with General Motors and with various universities. But all these people, it's the old story, nobody ever quits the CIA. They all end up on contract. And so one of the stories with, for example, Dr. Kit Green was, and I heard it from two different sources, is that if you're in the government and you start exhibiting symptoms of alien abduction, they send you to Kit Green, because he's a medical doctor. He's got a neurological background. So he puts people on MRIs, he checks them, is this person crazy, or is he an abductee? Because they basically are looking at this. So I've heard this from two different sources, and what I heard was that 50 people have been gone to Kit Green, high-level government officials who may have been abducted, and so that's his role. But he's also does a role in terms of generally putting material out So that's the magicians. They're the people all the way back into the 1940s who are not doing disinformation as some people think they're doing.
Are they kind of like the modern day Majestic 12?
Some
In
of
a
the
sense.
some of them may be on MJ12, but MJ12 I think is more of a group in terms of hardware, in terms of how to manage the program. The magicians are more. The role is to get it to what I call the five messiahs, and there are more than five messiahs, but I name sort of five. And like Stephen Greer would be one. Tom DeLonge, who's now very popular in terms of talking about, he's got 10 government sources who are feeding him material. These are people who actually believe it's their role in life, that they were called in life to bring disclosure to the people. And
Do they mean good though? Do they mean well?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But they just believe that this is their role, and so they accept what they're being told, and they usually have very big egos. Like DeLonge, Greer, all these people have very big egos, which means makes them easy to manage because they are very certain about themselves. And so what happens is, I'll give you an example, like Bill Moore, who was 1980, he was the guy who wrote the original Roswell book in 1980. So he became very famous for not only talking about a crash, but he had witnesses. He had all the intelligence people. He had people on the base who had talked about it. He actually had hard evidence. So he became the most prominent researcher in the 1980s. He was contacted about 7 days after he put out the book when he went on a book tour. And this book, I think, sold 1 million copies. He went on the book tour, and somebody phoned him up. And after one radio show, there was a call came in and said, "You're the only guy that knows what you're talking about." And of course he went, "Yeah, that's right." And then he went on the book tour, and about 3 days later, he got a second phone call from Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. And the guy said, "You're the only guy that knows what you're talking about. We'd like to help you." And he went, "Yeah, that's true." And that's what the thing is. Like, same with Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge said that when he went to Lockheed Skunk Works, he gave them what he calls his cargo cult theory about how he believed it worked. And he said as soon as he gave them his theory, they said, "We've got somebody in Washington we want you to meet," which gave him the indication that because he nailed it, he knew how it was working, that they agreed to play with him, which doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you think you've got it figured out, you've got an ego, and they basically start feeding him material. Now, some of the material, what Bill Moore was told when he was being fed by, it was an ex-CIA guy who had retired. They brought him out of retirement to run this program. What he was told is, "We're going to give you information that's true, information that's not true, and it's up to you to separate the wheat from the chaff." And of course, if you've got an ego and you're very sure of yourself, Bill Moore said, "Oh, I can do that." And so he got into this game where he was called the Avery, which I talk a lot about in the book. And the Avery was, these names are given to these intelligence type people or military people by Bill Moore, so that Bill Moore and his partner, whose name was Jamie Shandry, could talk on the phone. And instead of using the people's name, they would talk about the Blue Jay, who was Kit Green. They would talk about the Pelican, who was Ron Pandolfi. And so they gave everybody a bird name, and it was Bill Moore that gave the names. And what happened was these intelligence people that Bill Moore contacted and made contacts with, they're all people who had some sort of encounter during their job, whether it was in the military or intelligence, with the UFO phenomena, but they only get part of it because it's a need-to-know program. So just because you know a little bit of the story doesn't mean you're going to know everything. And one of the stories that I was told, for example, like Kit Green was a medical doctor, and he was in the program, he was running the UFO stuff, but he always wanted to get briefed on the alien autopsies, and he couldn't get briefed on the alien autopsies. He was interested in that, but he didn't have a need to know. So that's the thing. So you have these Avery people, and there was 24 of them, 24 birds that Bill Moore and Jamie Shandry had named. And all these people had a little piece of the puzzle, and then they started to talk to each other. They realized that there was other people that Bill Moore had put together. And so these Avery, they sort of talk with each other. They have email things, and basically they're just trying to figure it out as well. They've got a piece of the puzzle. And so Bill Moore tapped into these people, and this is the same thing with Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge's got 10 people. Stephen Greer claims to have 540 people. And the other Messiah that I talk about, who's actually going to be on tonight, they're doing a live YouTube broadcast tonight at 7 o'clock. He's only got one contact, but I allow him to be the Messiah because he's got the main guy, and that's Ron Pandolfi. And he's been friends with Ron Pandolfi since 1991, 26 years. And he told me he's talked to Ron Pandolfi almost every single day for 26 years. So Ron Pandolfi is putting material through Dan Smith that's filtering out, and the story that's coming out now, which will be on again tonight, is the story of the portal. That there's a number of portals in the United States, and they want this portal story out. And I'd never heard it before, but I've had enough contacts inside this group to actually convince me there actually may be a portal.
Before we go a little bit further into that, into the portal, is it possible that these 5 messiahs are controlled opposition?
I'm not understanding
Like,
what you mean.
is it possible that they are being, or COINTELPRO, that is it possible that they are being fed disinformation to spread amongst us?
Okay, well, that's what the majority of people in the UFO community would say. Like, this, for example, Stephen Greer says Tom DeLonge is being used. He's being used for disinformation. Tom DeLonge says Stephen Greer is being used for disinformation. Now, there is an element of disinformation, but where people say they're trying to disinform us. And I say that can't be happening because Jacques Vallée brought this up many decades ago. He said, it doesn't make any sense that the government would try to disinform a group of researchers who are very minimal. There's not many of us around, and who have no influence. We have no influence in the media. We have nobody listens to us. So he said, it doesn't make any sense that you're trying to throw us off because nobody's listening to us anyway. And so the idea, what I say, is you take the information and you put it inside disinformation. So what you do is you put out a story, and I'll give you an example. One of I call one of the magicians is a guy named Chase Brandon. Chase Brandon was the top CIA guy for Hollywood from 1995 to 2005. He was the second most powerful person inside the CIA to be able to speak publicly on behalf of the CIA without getting authorization. So he could go and make deals with Hollywood in exchange for help, portray the CIA in a positive light. So that was his job. Now he comes out on the 65th anniversary of Roswell, and he goes on coast to coast in front of 4 million people, and he says Roswell was real, it was extraterrestrial, and it involved bodies. And he said he got the information from a box that he saw inside Langley. And he was waiting for a film crew inside Langley to do into the archives. And he said, you're not allowed to be in the archives without an escort. But he was in there by himself. He tells this story. And then he said he found this Roswell box, had Roswell on the side, and he looked inside, and he said, I can't tell you what was in the box, but I can just tell you Roswell is real, it's extraterrestrial. And he writes this fictional book about how the CIA handled the Roswell affair. He said the book was reviewed, I've heard, between 2 and 8 times the CIA reviewed the book before it was released. So he releases this fictional book about how CIA controlled the thing. And it has disinformation, but it has kernels. He said, if you want to know what's going, if you want a good read the book. If you really want to know something's going on, read between the lines. So the stuff is contained inside disinformation. Because if they wanted to disinform us, I say there's 3 options. Either the government is covering up, which they're not doing. Because if they wanted to cover up, they would do exactly, I'm from Canada, they would do exactly what Canada's doing. Great Britain, Belgium, Australia, they would just shut up and not say anything. And the UFO story would go away. The only reason the UFO story continues in the United States is because they keep feeding it with this stuff. They keep it going. If you want to shut up, like in Canada, I'm in Canada, I've been there 42 years, working on the UFO phenomenon. People will ask me, what's the deal? Who's running it in Canada? What's going on? And I always say, I have, until last year I heard one story, but before that I have absolutely no idea. The Canadian government may not even be doing UFOs, as far as I know, because they've never talked about it. So if you want it to go away and to cover it up, you just don't talk about it. So they're not covering up, and they're not disclosing, because if they wanted to disclose, they would take the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and Fox News, and they'd take them on the ground with their cameras, show them the bodies, show them the crafts, give them a signed letter by the president, say whatever documents you need, we'll show you the documents. So they're not disclosing. They're doing something in between. They're doing the half disclosure, half cover-up type thing. Well, what they're doing is acclimatization. Apparently, there's been a number of think tank groups in the 1960s who were given this issue. What do we do with this? How do we handle this thing? Before they shut down Blue Book. And all of them said the same thing. They basically said that you have to acclimatize the people, that it will be a total meltdown if you release this thing without getting the people ready beforehand. So what they're doing is they're getting people accustomed to the fact that we're not alone in the universe, that there are these beings that are visiting us, And what you do is you put it mostly through Hollywood, through scripts and stuff. So people watch it, and it's subliminal. Same as last night I was talking about music. If you want to do it, you do it subliminally, where you're not confronting the person. If I come and say to you, they're here, and you've never heard it before, you immediately back
People freak out in defense mode.
In defense mode, yeah. Whereas if you're watching it in a movie, it's just a fictional thing, and you don't realize that they're actually programming people. And so this is the program I believe is going on right now. It's going to involve Steven Spielberg, J.J. Abrams, a number of big Hollywood people, and they're going to throw $1 billion at this latest disclosure thing, where they're going to have all this stuff coming out of Hollywood, and that's the way they do it, to get people. Because in my book I described the 64 reasons that they've decided not to tell you the truth. And what I say is, if you were the president and I were to sit down and brief you, you would do exactly what they've done. And you got to remember, there's been 14 administrations who've handled the UFO phenomena. 7 have been Republicans, 7 have been Democrats, and they've all done exactly the same thing. Which means that behind the scenes, they've been convinced that this is the way to go. Jimmy Carter was very open. He had a UFO sighting. He said, if I become president, I will disclose all the UFO stuff, except for the military weapon stuff. Gerald Ford said, I want an answer to this. I think we should put the military people under oath and force them to tell us what's going on. Both those men, when they got to the White House, never used the word UFO, ever, when they were in the White House, not once.
Is it because, I don't mean to interrupt you,
Yeah.
Is it because there's the long theory speculation about when presidents are elected or selected, whatever you want to, terminology you want to use, do they bring them into a smoky, gray, dark room filled with a bunch of men that call the shots behind the scenes, and they show them a footage of the JFK assassination? You think
From a different angle, yeah. I've always heard that one. I used to believe that. I no longer believe that. I now believe the president knows what's going on. The president is in charge. It works just like the Constitution says, for a number of reasons. For number one, if this was happening, somebody would defect. You have a lot of people who know chief of staff, has to schedule all the briefings and stuff like that. You have a lot of very high-level people involved in this thing. And if it was being done that way, where the president is a puppet, somebody would say, because when you're a president, you're a very egotistical type guy. So I say Trump is a prime example. I mean, you could use the other ones and say, yeah, they came in and showed him a footage from the Kennedy assassination that you've never seen before. But Trump, you're not going to face Trump. He's not going to get on his knees and pray to any cabal or secret thing. And so what I say is going on, the reason this is put out, that the president is a puppet, and because the president doesn't know what's going on, is because the president is the Wizard of Oz. The president is the guy running the cover-up. So if it becomes known that the president has been briefed and the president knows what's going on, everybody's going to go, he's the guy? Everybody just descends on the White House, and then he gets inundated with questions, and they don't want to put him in the position of standing on the little tape, the little white line, and lying, or saying, I don't know, because the president is the most powerful guy in the world. So
they sure do play dumb, don't they?
Yeah, but they when they get in trouble, like you see now with the Russia thing, all the people that are involved with the Trump campaign, with the Russia thing, it's like, no, they really didn't work for the campaign. They were just volunteers. They didn't have anything to do with the campaign, and they're backing it off, and they're moving it away from Trump. It had nothing to do with Trump. It was just these wild guys who were doing their own thing, and it had nothing to do with us. And so you always have to protect the president. So you can have, somebody's going to take the fall for it. If this Russia thing turns out, somebody's going to take the fall for it. The president will be saved. The president doesn't go down, because if the president goes down, the country goes down. So they'll all play that game. So I would say there would be a defection, that somebody like these high power guys who are egotistical or move their way to the top would say, I'm not in charge, I want to do something. And the president, if you take a look at Trump, people say, well, the black budget people are running the show. And I would say, no, they're not running the show, because you can actually take a look at Lockheed Skunk Works, which is rumored to be the aerospace company that back engineers the flying saucers. They also do the F-35. And with one tweet, Donald Trump basically just took the company out in one tweet about them ripping off the public. So the people don't realize how much power the president has, and that all.
Do you think that's going to put him in trouble, though? Put him like in a situation like JFK or Ronald Reagan?
No, I don't. I don't believe that sort of stuff anymore. For example, you talk about there's always a rumor in the UFO community that.
You don't think there's somebody out there that may try to take him out for trying to maybe help push for this incremental disclosure?
Well, there may be people in any field, like for example, Kennedy. I mean, there was like 50 different groups that wanted to kill Kennedy. So, but the thing is, can they get through the Secret Service? Can they get through to get him? So I think it's not a thing that's associated with UFOs. It may be all sorts of groups, but I don't think there's anybody. There may be people inside the oil industry who really don't want it out, who will put pressure through putting money in campaigns, this sort of thing. But I think basically it still comes down to all these people, high-level people, getting the briefing and understanding that no, we can't let this thing out, or all sorts of things that happen. For example, even the thing with the stock market. So everybody's vested in the stock market. Your pension is in there and stuff like this. When the 9/11 happened, they shut the stock market for 3 days, 4 days, whatever it was. The only reason they could open the stock market was because they said, if anybody stands up on a plane and tries to hijack the plane, we're going to have marshals on the plane and we're going to shoot them. Even though it makes no sense, you're going to shoot a gun inside a plane. But they said that, and everybody went, oh, okay, they got it under control. But with the UFO situation, if you understand how complex it is, and that it's got a lot to do with non-physical stuff, consciousness, all this kind of stuff, if the president stands up and says, UFOs are real, but we really don't understand what's going on, if the stock market starts to melt down, if suddenly everybody realizes, oh, we've got something other than oil, or even some rich guy decides, I'm going to short I'm going to short the oil market because it's a good way to make money. The markets, and so somebody starts shorting it, somebody else starts shorting it, somebody starts selling, and everybody starts selling. You cannot open the stock market again because you have no marshal on the plane. You have no way to say we've got this thing under control. Everybody's going to realize, and it's true, the government really doesn't. That's one of the 64 reasons they really don't have any control. And one of the examples was this Jim Semivan, who's the latest what I call magician. He's the guy who's running the Tom DeLonge organization, the people there, and he's also running Chris Bledsoe, who's an experiencer. So he's running two different camps and this disclosure stuff that's coming out. At one point, John Alexander, former Navy SEAL guy, head of non-lethal weapons for the American government, very interested in UFOs, was told by Semivan this is for real. And he said, I've talked to all the different agencies and I could never find anybody who's running the thing. I still don't believe it. He said, who's in charge? And Semivan said, they are, meaning the aliens. And if people realize this, that the government has no control over this thing, that they can fly around wherever they want, they can do whatever they want. In fact, there's stories. You've heard the stories of the military where they shut down Malmstrom Air Force Base, they shut down all the missiles, where they actually put missiles into launch sequence in Russia. And Semivan tells the story, and I've heard this from two. Yvonne Smith tells the story, and apparently Semivan told the story, that the president was abducted. That during a news conference, they shut down the entire news conference. They froze everybody. You know how they can freeze people. Everybody's frozen. They take the president, abduct him, and then put him back. And then the president tells everybody, I was abducted. And everybody else was frozen. Nobody else knew what was going on. That kind of stuff gets out, that they can actually grab the president and take him out. Or many years ago, there's a story about the Secretary General of the United Nations, Perez de Cuellar, that he was taken out of a convoy just when Russia fell. In that week, there was a convoy of cars with government officials from all different countries leaving the United Nations in the middle of the morning, and Perez de Cuellar was abducted from the convoy as the whole convoy was moving through New York City. So there's these kind of stories. If these things get out and sort of get any sort of traction, that they're doing this kind of stuff and that we have no control.
For what reason or agenda do you think they're doing that?
Well, they asked Semivan why would they abduct the president? And he said, they're just showing who's in charge. The same as the nuclear missiles. We're showing you who's in charge. Or the cattle mutilations, which everybody says are evil. If you look at the cattle mutilations, all cattle mutilations, according to David Perkins, who's one of the top authorities in the world on cattle mutilations, said that all cattle mutilations happen downwind and downstream from nuclear activities. And that there was a 1997 study done by the National Cancer Institute on effects on cancer from above ground nuclear tests. And they produced a map for hotspots for cancer east of the Rockies, up on the Plain States. And Perkins said, if you take that map and you put it on top of the cattle mutilation map where the hotspots are, it's exactly the same thing. So if you get this thing where this nuclear connection comes out, where we realized that they are just dead set against this nuclear stuff. You have all these sort of things where the government doesn't have any control, and the aliens are sending these signals, and you always want the president to be in charge. You know, it's like, I can go in and I can give you a briefing. I can say, Mr. President, here's what's going to happen. I don't know this is going to happen for sure, but the stock market may melt down and we can't turn it around. And we may have people panicking. We don't need 100%, Mr. President, to panic. We only need like 2% of people to start panicking and running around with guns and stuff like that and trying to shoot anything that moves around in the sky.
It'll make a ripple.
And so you tell the president all this stuff, and then you say, Mr. President, if you give us another 5 years, we don't have all the answers, which is one of the 64 reasons. We don't have all the answers. Give us another 5 years. The longer we delay this thing, the more answers we'll have in case they turn out to be evil and we have to fight them. And Mr. President, we can always drill an oil well in Alaska. It's not the end of the world. The unemployment rate is only 4.5%. It's not the end of the world. It's not to our advantage to do it right now. Give us 5 years. And most presidents, when they look at all these scenarios of the stock market might melt down, panic might break out, religions break down, all these different reasons, he'll go, yeah, okay, let's leave it for 5 years. Because every president wants to go down in history as being the guy who brought jobs, who ended wars, or, he wants to be a good guy. He doesn't want to be the guy who suddenly was at the head of this thing where, suddenly everything melted down and there was a big civil war or whatever might happen. And so it's so much uncertainty. It's not that they know for sure what's going to happen, but there's a lot of uncertainty as to what might happen if this does come out. So that's why they go through the acclimatization. The longer they can drag this thing out, the longer they can push this thing. And even Kit Green, who was one of the 14 messiahs, or the 14 magicians, he was given an interview with a guy from Great Britain. His name was Pilkington, who had written a book on the UFO phenomena. And his theory in the book was that it's all disinformation. It's all just covering government programs and stuff like this. So he's talking to Kit Green. And Kit Green by then had been retired from the CIA, doing other jobs, but still under contract with the CIA. And Kit Green says, what would you do if you had to deal with this problem? He says, well, what you'd do is you'd put out various memes inside Hollywood and stuff. There's reptilians, they're eating our kids, all this sort of stuff, and you build all these sort of things up, and then when the story breaks, what they call the core story. And the core story is, yes, aliens have been here, they had a crash, we've tried to back engineer that crash, and we're not doing very well. That's the core story, just this very simple story. So you build it up with all this evil alien stuff, eating our kids, and then when the story breaks, people go, what? They're not eating our kids? And then you go, no, they're not eating our kids. It's a core story. You tell them the core story and they go, well, then what's the big deal? So this is the thing. You drive it up, you put this stuff in there, and I think the story will be very basic. I don't think there'll be any evil aliens in there, anything like that, because they wouldn't be pushing the story to get out. From what I've heard from a number of sources and I've worked at this 42 years and I've never believed in disclosure. I've always said they have no intention to do it. I actually gave all my government documents away because I said this is a total waste of time. I'm going to do the consciousness thing. I'm not going to do government documents anymore. But what happened was that these people basically put the story out that they wanted it out. And that this was the time, and they're going to do it. And it wasn't that they're thinking about how to do it. I was told clearly there is a plan, and the plan is under motion. And if it was something that was really evil, really bad, they wouldn't be pushing to get it out. So it would indicate to me that it's going to be a very simple sort of story in terms of they're here because we've got environmental problems or whatever it is. So,
do you think that they already know who they or when they want to push this, I guess we can say disclosure, the cliche. Mm-hmm. Do they have an idea when they want to disclose this to the public?
Well, they're doing it all the time. So that's what I describe when I say disclosure.
I'm talking about the whammy. Is there going to be a whammy?
No, that's the thing they're going to avoid. It's always going to be this gradual disclosure thing, unless they're forced into that position. But unless they're forced into that position, it's the old idea. The farther you can push it down the road with this gradual disclosure thing, the better off you're going to be. The sooner you push it, the more chance there is that things you're going to spill the milk and you can't get it back in the glass. So no, it's basically the way
So it's more incremental, psychological, I guess, implanting that into our subconscious.
Yeah. Like Stephen Greer had claimed that he had gotten a briefing through to President Clinton through what he called a friend of Bill. And the friend of Bill came back and said, the president can't do it, but you can. And I've heard this numerous times where they're waiting, it has to come from the outside. I was even told by Chris Bledsoe, who's in one of these camps where he's got all these government people watching him because he's very 2015. And then if you read the WikiLeaks documents, they were sitting there waiting for someone to ask Hillary a UFO question. It's not like Hillary brings it up. And what happens is in November, she goes on the Kimmel show and she's expecting the UFO question. And according to the WikiLeaks documents, she didn't get the question. She was very upset because she had practiced the answer for 5 minutes. And she had this answer and she wouldn't get asked the question by Kimmel till March. So there's this idea that Hillary has to wait for someone to ask her. Same as Bill Clinton's told Stephen Greer, I can't do it, but you can. So they will respond to us. They feed us the material, but they're not overtly going to make a statement to say, this is going on, that's going on.
It almost sounds like Podesta was kind of working against her, almost.
Working against her?
Against Hillary, because he wasn't trying to set her up though, right? To with all this alien disclosure talk and UFO talk, he wasn't trying to set her up to fail, right?
No, that's why I said he had to have done a focus group. He had to have done a poll. He would never have put it out there because he would go down in history as the campaign manager who messed up the 2016 campaign by bringing the stupid aliens into it. So he would never have brought it up. He's a smart guy. So, like one of the top, he was the top Democrat guy in Washington, ran the big Democratic think tank, and a very, very powerful guy. So he knew what he was doing. It's sort of like he's the guy behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. He called himself the cult of non-personality. He was a powerful guy, but he never wanted to go on camera. He'd be behind this pulling the strings. So when he brings up, he says to Lena Dunham, good interview, Lena. Next time, ask her about the aliens. He's taking a big chance. When I saw that, I went, wow. Because we always think it's a toxic issue. And it could have been bad. I mean, it could have been where everybody said, well, she's a total nutcase, and John's a nutcase, and her poll numbers go down into to the teens or something. And then her role in history, his role in history was these two idiots who believed in UFOs. So that's why I said he had to uphold it. He had to have known that it wasn't going to backfire, and it didn't backfire. That it was a positive thing in there. And the unfortunate part was she didn't win the election. So she had actually stated during there that if I get in, if I can get agreement, I will release this, which indicates, you have to read through the lines what she's saying, if I can get agreement, which means that it's done not by a cabal, it's not done by some deep black group, it's done by the president. If I can get a group, so she's going to get whoever's involved, whether it's MJ12 or whether it's the cabinet, whoever. So, and if I can get agreement, so she takes a vote, and if the vote is right, they're going to make this move on the thing, which indicates the president again is in charge. That she's going to, or when she talks to Kimmel, and Kimmel says, "Well, I had your husband on here, and he told me he couldn't find anything. So what do you say to that?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to look again." And she wasn't disturbed by that at all, which again indicates that the president is running the show, although she has to get agreement.
Do you think that they're elected or the selected, like a lot of people will theorize? The presidents, because it's more of a two-part question. What I'm trying to ask you: do you think that they're actually elected, or do you think that they're set up to be selected by the few that are calling the shots behind the scenes?
Yeah, I don't believe that. I mean, I know that's a big theory because I don't think they have that much power. I think it's more, people do have influence, but the big money guys, but that's by putting money in campaigns. And if you put $100,000 into somebody's campaign, like people always say, well, they're mad because the government won't talk to us about UFOs. And I say, well, you give a $100,000 donation to Hillary Clinton's campaign, guarantee you she'll talk to you about UFOs.
The reason why I brought that up, because a lot of people speculated that Hillary was going to win the election.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the UFO community and this alternative side, they wanted Hillary to win because they figured her being a Clinton, there may be more things that are incrementally put out there to the public when it comes to disclosure.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. And yet Ron Pandolfi, the CIA guy now, said that he was predicting from people inside that I was talking to, said he was saying in August already, Hillary's going to lose. Trump's going to win. That he's been selected. And so what happened was when Hillary lost, Ron Pandolfi puts out a message to a guy by name, another Avery guy. His name is Robert Collins, who was known as the Condor in the Avery. He was a U.S. Air Force scientist at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And he puts on his Facebook on, I think it was January the 7th of this year, he said, I just got an email from my good friend Ron Pandolfi, who got me an interview with some intelligence agency or whatever. And he said, Trump is pro-disclosure and against disinformation, and we'll wait till he's in and then we'll push the issue. And that's what's happening right now. Ron Pandolfi has gotten his wife involved, from what I've heard. His wife's name is Aliha, and she's got a YouTube channel, and she's putting interviews with Dan Smith that she's done on UFOs and the portal and all this stuff on YouTube. And from what I've heard, she was involved in the briefing of Trump about the portal. So Pandolfi has, from what I heard, had briefed Trump a number of times during December. Very positive on Trump.
So what exactly are these portals? Are these actual portals that these extraterrestrials are, I guess, maybe traveling here, maybe through other dimensions, or what?
I'm just gathering the material right now. What I know from what I've asked, because I didn't believe any. When I first heard the portal, it's like, come on, already. I mean, give it a rest, you know. And then when I heard, I knew there was this John guy who had gone through, and I knew who this guy was. And then I'm talking to a producer in Hollywood, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's real." I said, "The portal story is real?" I said, "Oh yeah, it's real. It's a real story." And I go, he said we were going to go in August with Ron, and then it was called off. And I'm going, and sort of your mind is just sort of scrambling to figure out, like, wow, you know, how could we miss this? And so he asked Ron. Well, he actually, just in the last couple of weeks, he said, Ron gave me the location of another portal, and I'm going to the portal. I said, "You're going to the portal?" And I said, "How many are there?" And he said, he asked Ron, and Ron said there's 42, there's lots. He said there's 42 vectors. Now, I don't know what that means. So, but the portal is movable. Apparently it was at Area 51. And then there was a story that it was going to be, that Trump would go through the portal.
So it's not natural part of the Earth?
No.
Or anything like that?
No. According to what they're describing for portals. And so then there's the second one that this producer is going to go to, and they were going to move it to an island called St. Catharines off of Georgia. The portal was going to be there, and Trump was supposed to go through it on April Fool's Day. So then, of course, nothing happened, and then Ron Pandolfi posts on April Fool's Day on this web thing that his wife is going to do an interview with Dan Smith tonight. So again, it's right out in the open. Like in one situation, Ron Pandolfi's on camera during these films that his wife puts up on the internet, and she basically asks him, and he talks about the portal. And it's like, this is the head guy. This has been running the UFO show for like 30 years, and this guy's on camera talking about this portal. So I'm not really sure. We've put them in contact with Paula Harris, who's talked about a portal story, and she's a pretty major researcher. She's been around about maybe as long as I have with UFOs, and she talks about going through a portal at Mount Shasta in 2014, 2015, and she describes this experience. So we put them in contact. It's this idea that there's, and sometimes they call it the wishing well, that on the other side you have to be allowed, the other side has to allow you in. And so you need both sides to work on it. And then when you get through the other side...
It's like a portal to another dimension?
To another side, and they say Jesus and a lot of other stuff is on the other side, and that when you get to the other side, you can actually manifest and make things come true. So, and you can move back and forth through this portal, and apparently Ron Pandolfi had been through it twice. So it's kind of nebulous, because I really don't really understand what a portal is, but it's this whole idea that you can move to their side, move to our side. The way Paula Harris was describing it is that the aliens opened the portal. They said, "You're here," and the way she described it is they were told they're going into the bush. They said, Antaral, who is the name of the alien, Antaral is here. Are you ready for this? Are you ready to do this? You have to hold hands. You go into the bush, and she's holding hands with two women, and this white mist starts to come out of the ground, and they say, "Do not let go of the people's hands until you're through the white mist." And she describes this to go through the white mist, and then she said it was the scariest moment of her life when she actually had to let go of these people's hands. She was just petrified, and she suddenly, then they could see the alien, and the alien's talking in this weird language that she can't understand. So that's her description of portal, and it sounds very much similar to this, where there it sounds like the aliens are opening it. This way it sounds like it's there, and they can actually move it. And then one of the stories was that the government had back engineered one of these portals. So that was the latest story I heard maybe a couple days ago through Ron Ron Pandolfi, that we've actually back engineered one of these things. So
and it kind of reminds me, this portal, of the Stargate, such as in Stargate SG-1, Stargate Atlantis.
Yeah.
And like you talk about Hollywood being a key factor in incrementally pushing this information to the subconscious.
Yeah. So that they may have got those ideas. That may be where they got it from. Exactly. That there was actually a truth.
And then if you think about it, in the end credits of Stargate SG-1, they use the portal Stargate. In the end credits, they say, I'm paraphrasing, we'd like to thank the Department of Defense, the Homeland Security, or Air Force.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know.
So what are they doing involved? Are they some other?
That's the thing. That's how they put it through. In fact, I got another one. I got an email, and this is like, I really hadn't gotten to the portal thing yet. I got a Facebook message from a guy who's involved in a TV show that's coming out called Counterpart, and he said, I just want to ask you, is this drip drip? It looks like it's drip drip to me. They're trying to get something out. So he starts telling me, he said, the theme of the thing is there's a low-level United Nations guy, and they discover a portal. And they're in Europe, and this whole thing deals with a portal. I said, are you kidding me? A portal? It's like, suddenly, everything's portal. And I never watched science fiction. So when they first brought up the portal, I go, what? Come on, that's science fiction nonsense, like all this sort of stuff. And then when I heard these inside people talking about, yes, this is for real, especially the producer, this Hollywood producer guy said, oh yeah, this thing's for real. It's real stuff. And I'm going, wow. So that's the thing, is how they put that sort of stuff in there. And I would say that almost everything that we believe in the UFO community has been leaked. The story of Area 51 was leaked. It was leaked to a guy by the name of Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar didn't have the 2 degrees he's claiming, and that's how it works. So he comes out, he tells a story, and they know that people are eventually going to find out he doesn't have the 2 degrees that he master's degrees that he claimed. So as soon as they find out, they say it's a hoax, and the story goes away. And everybody says, oh, it's just a story, and the story gets out about Area 51. Nobody believes it. The other thing they were doing there, and again, what they were trying to do is Bob Lazar was telling the story to John Lear. Now, John Lear's father owned Learjet. He ran for Senate in Nevada. Very, very popular guy. Flew 120 planes, flew for the CIA. He was like this, real powerful figure to the black world and stuff like that. But John had gotten into UFOs in 1987 through people that came out of Rendlesham Forest. Somebody was involved in Rendlesham Forest, and he got into it. And he got into the evil alien thing, the underground base and the fight out and this sort of stuff. So nobody believed John Lear, even though he was a very powerful guy. It was like, oh, John Lear, he's into all this crazy stuff, underground bases and stuff like that. So Lazar was feeding the story to John Lear. And what they wanted, I believe, was they wanted John Lear to tell the story. Everybody'd say, it's John Lear, forget it, it's nonsense. And they would walk away, and the idea of Area 51 would get out. What they didn't realize was that George Knapp, who had won like 22 Emmy Awards for investigative journalism at KLS TV in Las Vegas, one night he would not have a guest for one of his shows. So he phoned up John Lear and he said, you got that guy that said he was fired from Area 51? I need a guest for tonight. Can you get the guy and put him on my show? And they put him on in backlight. They photographed him from the back, gave him the name Dennis, and the thing went viral around the world. And suddenly, all these TV crews, there was buses, there was hundreds of people up in the mountains looking down over the base, and suddenly it all backfired. It had gone viral, and Bill Clinton actually had to take a bunch of land away to force the people back 25 miles instead of 10 miles, because they were up in the mountains, and they were actually watching everything that went on at the most top secret base in the world. And they actually took them a couple of years to get back control of the story. So that's what they're doing. And even the story of the live alien, and that's a true story. The story of the live alien, the story of MJ-12 was leaked through documents. And I say the documents were all phony. All you have to do is change one word on that document, put it out, and then say it's a phony document. It is. But the stuff inside the document is for real. Because in my book, I detail 20 high-level government people who have talked about MJ-12. So forget about the documents. The documents are phony. I'll agree with that. But all these high-level people are talking. And it actually gives the understanding that it's run out of Mount Weather, Virginia, which is the bunker where if there's a nuclear attack, that's where you're going to take the president. They have all the communication systems there. It's the FEMA headquarters. This is where you can interact with foreign embassies, with military. All the communications is there. The president will be there. And that's where they're running the whole UFO operation. And it's called continuity of government. And even John Alexander, at one point, and he's a very powerful guy in the UFO community, has been in all the black budget stuff. He's worked on black budget his whole thing. He said, somebody whispered in his ear, MJ-12 was for real. And he said, but it's got nothing to do with UFOs. It's got to do with continuity I believe it's got to do with continuity of government. And when you get it all together, then I looked at his book. It took me like 2 minutes to figure out who he was talking to. He was talking to somebody at Mount Weather. And it is FEMA that runs it, because that's continuity of government. If you are in charge and of FEMA, if there is ever a crash, like in New York City, or the aliens land on the White House lawn or something, and the panic and all this kind of stuff breaks out, the stock market starts to melt down, you have a guy in FEMA who's in charge of disasters. We got to put money in the banks. They know they've got a plan exactly what they're going to do if this thing melts down. It makes total sense that FEMA is the people that you would brief the head guy for FEMA, because he's the guy that's going to be behind the 8 ball if this thing breaks. And one of the stories that, as I said, in 42 years, I've never heard what the government is doing in Canada because they never talked about it. But last year I was with Paul Hellyer, who's the former Minister of Defense in Canada, and had not really been interested in UFOs until the Corso book came out in 1997. We were on a panel, and somebody asked him, well, who in the Canadian government knows about this? And he said, well, the Privy Council. He's sort of guessing. And then the question went to something else, and then it came back to him, and he said, I just thought of one other guy that knows what's going on, and he's the head of emergency management in Canada. And he said this happened a couple years ago. The head of emergency management, former head of emergency management in Canada, was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And he got a phone call from an Air Force guy, and he said, this guy, he never mentions who the guy is, this guy's dying, he's got to get something off his chest. And he's decided that you're the guy he wants to talk to. So Hellyer says, okay, but Hellyer doesn't phone him. Then he gets another phone call from the Air Force guy, and he said, he's about to die, you better phone him, you better talk to him. So he phones up the guy, head of emergency management, which is the equivalent to head of FEMA in the United States, and the guy said, I just want to let you know, I've got to get this off my chest. It's for real. I was taken to Langley, I signed a bunch of documents, I was taken to Area 51, I was actually inside one of the crafts inside Area 51. I just want to let you know this thing's for real. And that backs up what John Alexander says, that he was told it was continuity of government. And so when you see all these pieces put together, that the government, I firmly believe the government is running this thing, it is under government control, but the way they do it is to protect the president, give him plausible deniability. So it's like the president doesn't know what's going on. The same as what happened in '69, they shut down Blue Book. They didn't shut it down because they really didn't believe in UFOs. They didn't want to have to put a press guy out to answer every UFO question that came along. So what you do is you shut it down and you move it to the black world. You say there's nothing to it, we're not going to do this anymore, and now you can do it in private to the black world. No more documents, no more press conferences. And the same thing in 1995. Ron Pandolfi was responsible in 1995 for shutting the remote viewing program down. It was in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they said that they wouldn't put Ron Pandolfi on the need to know for the documents because they knew if he ever got on the need to know, he was going to grab the program and shut it down. He eventually talks to Congress. Congress moves it to the CIA. CIA does a study, immediately shuts it down and says, remote viewing doesn't work, there's no evidence for it, and they shut it down. And all they're doing is moving it from the white world where you got to produce documents and have a responsibility to the black world where you can do whatever you want without answering to anybody.
One final question before we wrap things up.
Okay.
We're talking about the government incrementally spreading this truth and disclosure, either through Hollywood or through WikiLeaks or whatever.
Yeah.
So why is the government seem to be involved in Antarctica? Is this another type of incremental disclosure? Because John Kerry visited that last year. I believe it was December or November, sometimes last year. So is there some kind of portal there, or is there some type of alien body or advanced technology, or what is it?
I can't really answer that except that because I haven't studied that. I just have great reservations about the story because it basically goes back to this Nazi thing, which I think may be mostly disinformation. The idea that the Nazis were working with the reptilians and that they've got a base. Because one of the things people produce for me is that they found this underground thing a mile down or whatever. So you can actually do the calculations. I think it's like 0.7 inches of snow per year that would build up. This thing would not be half a mile down. It would be that not very far. And the ice is actually moving. So how would you know where it is? Because the ice is actually, it's like a moving ice sheet of ice. So it's not going to be in the same spot all the time. I have grave reservations, especially when it gets to evil aliens. When people start talking about the evil aliens, or that there's an agreement with the Germans, I don't think they're really making they would be uniform across the world. They would be giving technology to everybody equally, and they wouldn't be making pacts with the Russians or the Germans or whatever. Because there is a story like with Eisenhower, this thing where they said in 1954 Eisenhower made an agreement with the Greys to abduct people in exchange for alien technology. I say it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because if number one, the document that came out 2 weeks after this event happened said that they were Etherian type. They were human type aliens. They weren't Greys. They weren't this sort of thing. And the other thing is, if you're the president of the United States and you sign a treaty with an alien, if the alien breaks the treaty, what are you going to do? Take them to court? I mean, the aliens can abduct anybody they want, and they abducted Betty.
Betty Martin.
Betty Andreasen. And they abducted Leo Sprinkle, and they abducted Colin Andrews, 1950. All these people before 1954. So they were abducting people before 1954. They didn't need an agreement to abduct people. And so people would say, that he made this treaty, and then they make another mistake in this sort of idea that the president is in control. By they say at the end of his thing, he made the military-industrial complex speech. Beware the military-industrial complex. Well, I spent a lot of time doing the documents, and I was at the Eisenhower Library, and there was no UFO documents. So I spent 2 weeks there just sort of poking through stuff, and I actually pulled the speech. And I pulled all the early versions of the speech, and I can absolutely assure you that's not what it says. It said, beware the military-industrial congressional complex. And what it is the story about the Congress, that congressmen are always making deals with the military to put military establishments, factories in their district, and then once you get them in, you can't get them out, because you've got a senator who's going to block it from being, because it's 10,000 jobs or whatever. And the prime example was Abrams tank, the A1 tank, and there was an article that was actually written. It was called "Tanks but No Thanks." And what happened was the Army had said, because now you can just take out tanks with guided missiles. They're totally useless. So they said, we don't want any more tanks. We don't want any more Abrams. And they could not stop the factory from making the tanks because they hired 10,000 people to build tanks. That's what he was talking about. And the reason it was taken out, they took the word congressional out and just left the military-industrial complex. They took military-industrial congressional complex because they said you shouldn't offend Congress. So that word was taken out. And so the speech doesn't reflect what people think, that he was warning about the military. And then people will say, well, he's the last guy to have knowledge of the whole thing. But I said, again, you've got to understand how the government works. That the president that's leaving briefs the new president coming in. So if Eisenhower knew and Kennedy didn't know, well, where'd the information go? They would have had to, because once the president leaves, say Eisenhower or Obama, whoever, once you leave the White House, you have no power whatsoever. So what do you can't take the documents with you. You can't do whatever. So what does he do with those documents? He's going to brief Kennedy. And people will say, well, Kennedy didn't know and he was assassinated because he was going to give the documents to the Russians. And I said, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have him not knowing anything and then tell me that he was killed because he was going to give the documents to the Russians. He either knew or he didn't know. And what I believe is that they're playing this protection of the president, plausible deniability, by saying the president doesn't know what's going on, the same as they're doing right now with Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't know what was going on. All these Russian things, that's all those guys. They were just volunteers. They weren't working for Trump. They had nothing to do with Trump. And they're distancing the president because they don't want the president to go down. So somebody will take the fall. The same as the UFO situation. Someone will put their hand up and say, it was all me. Same as Oliver North during the Iran-Contra. Never got to Reagan because Oliver North said, it was all me. I did it all by myself. And he takes the fall and the president gets saved. Because if the president goes down, the country goes down.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cameron, for taking your time with me.
Beautiful. I loved it. Thank you.
Thanks.